Hi guys, and welcome to the seventh video of our Learning to Build iOS Apps with Swift series. This is Mohit from Indian iOS Guru, and today we'll be talking all about functions. So functions are self-contained blocks of code that perform a certain task and allow us to reuse code. Along with its name, every function in Swift has its own type. The type of a function is its parameter types and its return type. This unique feature of Swift allows us to treat functions like any other objects. Moreover, functions in Swift can also be nested within other functions to encapsulate useful functionality. So functions can optionally have a set of inputs, also called as parameters, that the function internally uses to do some processing, and optionally the function can have a return type to indicate that the function will return the result of the processing back to the line of code that called the function. Functions have a name, and we call a function by referencing its name and passing in parameters. The order in which the values, also known as arguments, are passed to the function should match the order in which the parameters are declared. So let's look at an example. So as you can see, the func keyword is used to indicate the declaration of a function. The arrow operator is used to indicate that the function is going to return a value. And from the function signature, we can see that the name of the function is compute square. It accepts a parameter called number, whose data type is int, and the function returns a value of type int. So to call the function, we can simply say compute square and pass in the argument, that is 3. And you can see the function is returning back the number 9. Now since I know that the function is going to return a value, I can store it in either a variable or a constant. So let's say ax is equal to compute square and pass the argument 5. And you can see that now ax has the value 25 stored in it. So functions in Swift can also have multiple input parameters separated by commas. So this function compute square is accepting a single parameter and returning a single value. And now we'll see how functions can accept multiple parameters. So let's say, for example, func say hello. The first parameter is called first name of type string. The second parameter is called last name of type string, and this function is going to return a value. And I will simply say return. Since my return type is string, I have to return a string, and I'm going to say hello, first name, last name. So to call this function, I can simply now put it inside a println and call the function from within println, say hello, and pass the parameters. And you can see we get the output hello Amitabh Bachchan being printed out. So functions and can also take in no parameters, and let's see how to create functions without parameters. So let's say I have a func, which name of this function is say good morning. It takes in no parameters but returns a string. and from within the function I'll simply return the string good morning. Similarly, functions can also not return any values, and to create such a function we can say func say good afternoon. So this function basically takes in no parameters and returns nothing. So we simply skip the arrow operator and implement the function. And in here I'll say print ln good afternoon. And to call these functions I can simply say good morning. You can see it prints good morning, and I'll say good afternoon. And you can see there's nothing returned on this line of code since this function is not set to return anything. So the return type is effectively void. So functions in Swift can also have multiple return values with the help of tuples. So let's see how to implement this. We can have, for example, a function called find first and last. Now this function is going to accept an array of integers. So the name of the parameter is array and its data type is an array of integers, and it's going to return a tuple, and within this tuple we have a member called first, which is going to be an integer, and we have a member called last, which is again going to be an integer. So let's return. So I'm going to return a tuple, and I'm going to say array. The first element is at index number 0, and the last element is at the array dot count minus 1. So as you can see, we are giving names to the individual tuple values that help us to easily access the individual values. So for example, if I was to call this function, I can say let first and last equal to find first and last, and over here put in an array okay. And if I was to print, I can say the first element is backslash first and last dot first, and the last element is first and last dot last. Let's check the output, and you can see the first element is 1 and the last element is 4. So you can see first and last is being printed out correctly. So let's talk about the names for the parameters. All the functions we have seen so far have defined parameter names. So as you can see here, the name of the parameter is array. The name of the parameter here is first name and last name. So these parameter names are only for local use within the scope of the function. So this can cause ambiguity as we may not know the purpose of the parameters. So to solve this problem, we can use external parameter names to indicate the purpose of the argument. So let's say, for example, I create a function called draw circle, and to this function I pass in three parameters: the x, y, and the radius. And within this function I simply put the code to draw a circle. Now when I call this function, I'll call this function with, let's say for example, 12.34, 3.8 and 5.9. So the purpose of these three numbers that are passed to the above functions is unclear, and it leads to ambiguity in code. So the only way to know the purpose of each of these numbers is if we know the exact method signature beforehand. So to make our intent clear, we can use external parameter names. So let's say, for example, I create another function called draw circle 2. Now in this function I say at x, x which is a double, at y, y which is double, and radius r which is also a double. Now in here I can say println drawing a circle at backslash x, comma backslash y with radius backslash r. So as you can see, x, y and r are the internal parameter names and are used internally in the function. And when we call this function from outside, we can say draw circle 2 at x, and I can specify 3.5. At y I can specify 4.2 and radius 8.9. So the intent of these three parameters is much more clear when we use external parameter names. So this makes our code more expressive, and you can see that internally the three parameters will be referenced by their internal names, that is x, y and r. So parameters can also have default values, and we can omit the parameter while calling the function. So for example, let's say I have a function called draw square. I'll give it external names as well. So at x, double, at y, y is a double, with side, and side is a double with a default size of 3. And I'll print ln by saying drawing a square at x, comma y with side, print the side. So sorry, forgot the closing parenthesis. So when I want to call this function, I can simply say draw square at x. Let's say I'll draw at the origin, and if I completely ignore the width side parameter, you can see that I'm printing out drawing a square at 0, 0 with side 3.0, and I can call this function as draw square at 4.5, 3.2 with side 6.7. Let me just comment out this code. So you can see drawing a square at 4.5 comma 3.2 with side 6.7. So when I ignore this parameter with a default value, it takes in the value that was being passed in the method signature. So functions in Swift can also have variable parameters. So functions can have parameters that can be passed a variable number of input values, and the values passed to such a parameter are available as an array in the body of the function. So let's say, for example, I have a function called find average, and this function takes a variable number of integers which I indicate with three dots, and this function returns a double. I'll put the logic of this function which says total equal to 0, and as I mentioned, the values are available as an array in the body of the function. So I can say for number in numbers and total plus equal to number, and I can return total divided by numbers dot count. So there seems to be a problem here. It says int is not convertible to double. So this expression is doing an integer division. We need to force it to do a double division. So we convert the denominator to a double. So looks like both have to be converted to double, and there we go. No problem. And to find the average, now I can simply say 3 comma 5 comma 4 comma 6 comma 8 comma 1. You can see it's returning 4.5, and here I can say find average, just pass in 1, I get in 1, pass in 3, and expected I should get 2. So it's very important to note that the variable parameter should be the last parameter in the function, which is accepting multiple parameters to avoid ambiguity. So this function numbers, let's say it has to be the last parameter, and if this function needs to accept another set of parameters, I would put that before the variable parameter, just like this. So let's talk about in-out parameters in Swift. So if we want to make changes to external variables by doing some calculations within the function, we declare the parameters as in-out parameters. So let's look at an example. We say function swap. My first parameter is an in-out. The name is A and type is int. Second parameter is in-out as well. The name is B, type is int. This function returns nothing, and all it does is let temp equal to A equal to B, A equal to B, and B equal to temp. So one thing we have to know very important about in-out parameters is that we have to call this function with two variables declared beforehand. We cannot call this function with constants and literals. So let's say I have two variables called var first int equal to 5 and var second int equal to 11, and when I call this function, you can see it's put the ampersand sign, which indicates that it's something like how we work with pointers in C. So I'm going to send the address of the first int, and I'm going to send in the address of the second int. And after the swap, let's inspect the values. Oops. So you can see first int is now 11 and second int is now being evaluated to 5. So the original values in the two variables have been modified. And like I mentioned, this is something like how like the pointers in C. So when you work with in-out parameters, effectively you have to pass in the address of the variables whose values you want to change. So let's talk about function types. So functions in Swift have their own types, just like how variables and constants have their own data types. For example, the function type of the swap function here is the function type is int, comma int, and it returns nothing. And so to type it out, the function type is int, which returns nothing. So the function type for our average function is a variable number of ints which returns a double. And because of this special feature of Swift, we can pass functions as parameters to other functions and also return functions from functions. So for example, I have a function called a special function which takes in a function as a parameter, and the type of this function is a string and a string, and it returns a string, and additionally it takes another parameter called string1 of type string and string2 of type string. So this function returns nothing, and I'm going to say let x equal to, I'm going to execute the function that was passed as a parameter to me, and I will pass in the two string values that have been received by this function, string1 and string2. So to call this function, I'll simply say special function, and I'll pass in my say hello function. Say hello, and I'll pass in a string Aishwarya Rai. Okay, sorry, comma is missing. And you can see it's printing out hello Ashwarya Rai. So the reason for this is I am passing the say hello function as it is to this param function, and internally I can refer to the say hello function by the name param function, and I know that say hello, the data type of say hello is string comma string and returns a string. So I pass it to string values and it executes the output for me. And just like this, similarly, functions can also return functions. So, for example, I have a function called another special function which has no parameters but returns a function which takes a string and returns a string. And from within this function, I'll simply return the say hello function. And when I call this function, let's say returned function is equal to another special function. So you can see the type of return function is a function which takes a string and returns a string. And now I can refer to the say hello function by its new name, which is returned function, and pass in two strings. So my Xcode is beach balling. Let's give it some time. And you can see we get the output, hello Amir Khan. So what we're doing is basically we're referencing say hello with another name now called return function. So this brings us to the end of our 7th video of learning to build apps, iOS apps with Swift. The code will be put up on GitHub and the link will be shared in the description of this video. Also, the link to our website, indianios.guru, is available in the description, and head over to our website to have a Q&A session with the topics that we are covering in the video series. So see you guys next time.